The sun had just started to peek through the thin clouds, casting a warm, soft glow over the little town. People moved about their morning routines, chatting and laughing as they went. In a small apartment above a quiet cafe, she sat by the window, sipping her coffee and watching the world come to life. Life had always been ordinary, predictable, and yet comfortable in its way. She liked the quiet mornings, the gentle hum of the streets below, and the way sunlight danced on the wooden floors. Her apartment was modest, filled with little reminders of a life she enjoyed quietly. There were shelves with books she had collected over the years, postcards from places she had never been but dreamed of visiting, and a small collection of trinkets that held memories she hadn't shared with anyone. Her days were simple, often spent working at the cafe below, where laughter and conversation were constant companions. She liked being around people, listening to their stories, and helping make their mornings a little brighter. It was easy, predictable, and safe. The cafe was alive with its usual morning chaos. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft aroma of baked goods. Baristas called out orders, laughing at small jokes, and the regulars exchanged greetings with familiar smiles. She moved through it all quietly, greeting the customers with a warm smile and serving their drinks. Even though she was surrounded by laughter and chatter, there was a part of her that felt distant, almost like an observer in someone else's story. She had dreams and ideas that she kept tucked away, hidden beneath the routine of everyday life. She enjoyed the laughter that filled the room each morning. It made her feel connected, even if she didn't always join in. Children would sometimes run in, giggling, dragging their parents along with them. Friends met for their weekly catch-ups, sharing stories that made them laugh until their eyes watered. Even strangers could make her smile with a simple joke or a funny comment about the weather. The cafe was full of life, full of moments that felt small but important, and she was always there to witness them, to be part of them in a quiet, steady way. Yet, beneath the laughter and the smiles, there was a longing she couldn't quite name. She had always loved music, a passion she had kept private for fear of being judged or misunderstood. Her piano sat in the corner of her apartment, untouched for months. It was old, slightly worn, but it held a warmth that nothing else did. She would sit and imagine herself playing, letting the melodies drift through the room, but she had never actually played in front of anyone. It was a secret world, a place where she felt free and alive, yet completely alone. Her life was full of small joys, but it was also full of routine. She would wake, make coffee, go to work, smile at strangers, and come home to her quiet apartment. On weekends, she might visit the market, take a walk in the park, or sit by the river and watch the water flow. It was peaceful, and she liked the peace, but there was always a whisper of something more, a feeling that life held something extraordinary just beyond her reach. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel it, like a faint melody waiting to be heard. One morning, everything started to change in the most unexpected way. It was a day like any other at the cafe, with the usual chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cups and saucers. She was behind the counter, arranging pastries, when a group of local musicians came in. They were friendly, joking with each other, and carrying instruments that caught her eye immediately. She watched them with a mix of curiosity and longing. Their laughter was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a pull toward something outside her ordinary life. The musicians noticed her watching and smiled. One of them, a kind-eyed man with a gentle voice, asked if she played any instruments. She hesitated, a flush rising to her cheeks. "Just a little," she said softly, not wanting to seem boastful. They encouraged her gently, telling her there was no pressure, just fun. For some reason, their words reached her in a way nothing else had. She felt a flutter of excitement, a spark that she hadn't felt in years. It was as if the room itself had shifted, the laughter and music blending together to create a space where anything felt possible. She remembered the piano waiting for her at home. The thought of playing in front of others made her nervous, but also strangely exhilarated. Maybe, she thought, it was time to let herself be heard, even just a little. She finished her shift with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, thinking about the melodies she had tucked away in her mind. For the first time in a long time, she imagined what it would feel like to share them, to let others hear the music that lived quietly inside her. That evening, she sat at her piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The apartment was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater and the distant sounds of the city. She took a deep breath and pressed down the first key. The note filled the room, simple and pure. She played another and another, each one gaining confidence. The melodies she had imagined for years now flowed from her fingers, surprising even herself with their depth and emotion. It was as if she had unlocked a part of herself that had been waiting patiently all along. The music wrapped around her, filling every corner of the apartment. She closed her eyes, letting the notes carry her away from the ordinary, from the quiet routines of her life. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her, the piano, and the sound that connected her to something larger than herself. It was beautiful, powerful, and terrifying all at once. She felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known she could feel, a release from the invisible walls she had built around her life. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. The music slowed, becoming gentler, as if it too were tired from the journey it had taken. She finally lifted her hands from the keys, her heart racing, her mind alive with possibilities. She realized that this was just the beginning, that something important had shifted within her. The ordinary life she had known was still there, but now it felt different, infused with a new energy, a new hope. As she sat back, breathing heavily, she thought about the cafe, the laughter, and the musicians who had unknowingly inspired her. She smiled, realizing that small moments could have the biggest impact. The world was full of ordinary mornings and quiet routines, but it was also full of sparks waiting to ignite. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she felt ready to find out. Something had awakened in her that day, a sense of purpose and possibility that she had never allowed herself to feel before. The laughter that had filled the room was still there, but now it had a new companion, the music she could finally share. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, spilling soft stripes across the wooden floor. She woke with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years, a quiet thrill that made her stretch and take a deep breath before starting her day. The memory of last night's music lingered, the sound of the piano echoing in her mind. For the first time, she felt that maybe she could step beyond her usual routines and explore something new, something that had been waiting inside her all along. At the cafe, life went on as usual. The aroma of coffee and baked bread greeted her as she entered, and familiar voices called out greetings. She smiled and waved, noticing the same patterns, the same friendly banter. But something inside her had shifted. She moved with a little more energy, her heart lighter, her eyes brighter. Even small moments seemed different. When a customer laughed at a clumsy joke, she found herself laughing more freely, as if the music had unlocked a small piece of joy she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. The musicians who had come in the day before were back, setting up at a small table near the corner. She watched them with curiosity and a quiet excitement. They were tuning instruments, laughing at mistakes, and chatting with one another. She hesitated for a moment, then approached them. I play a little," she said softly, her voice a mix of nerves and hope. They looked up with encouraging smiles. "Would you like to try?" one of them asked gently. No pressure, just for fun. Her heart raced. She had never played in front of anyone, not like this. It was one thing to sit alone in her apartment, and quite another to perform where people could hear her. But something about their kindness and the easy laughter in the room made her feel safe. She nodded slowly, and they helped her set up a small keyboard they had brought along. Her fingers trembled as she touched the keys. The first note she played wavered, soft and uncertain. She glanced at the musicians, who nodded encouragingly. Another note followed, then another, and soon she was finding small fragments of melody that felt familiar and comforting. The room was quiet now, the chatter fading as people sensed something special unfolding. She could feel the music filling the space, wrapping around the walls, touching everyone in a way that was subtle but undeniable. As she played, she noticed the change in the people around her. Laughter and conversation paused, replaced by attentive silence. The musicians smiled and nodded, letting her take the lead, and she felt a rush of confidence she hadn't known existed. Each note became steadier, more certain, and she allowed herself to feel the joy of creating something beautiful. It was as if the room itself was breathing with her, listening to the music, absorbing it and responding in kind. A young woman at a nearby table had stopped reading and was watching her, her eyes wide with amazement. A few children leaned forward on the counter, quiet and still, captivated by the sounds that floated effortlessly through the cafe. Even the baristas paused for a moment, holding cups in their hands, smiling, their movements slower as if they didn't want to break the magic. She realized that the music had a power she had never imagined, a gentle force that could reach into hearts and lift moods without a single word. The first few minutes passed like a dream. She experimented with different notes, discovering harmonies that felt natural under her fingers. She stumbled occasionally, hitting the wrong key, but each mistake was met with encouragement rather than judgment. It gave her courage to continue, to explore more, and to let her emotions guide the music. She closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm, letting her fingers dance across the keys, creating melodies that were simple but filled with meaning. Time seemed to bend around her. Minutes felt like seconds, and when she finally opened her eyes, she noticed that the cafe was still quiet, all eyes on her. A soft applause broke the silence, gentle and warm. Her cheeks flushed with surprise and joy. She had never expected this. The laughter and chatter she loved had returned, but now it was mixed with applause, with smiles that seemed deeper and more genuine. People were not just listening. They were feeling the music, and she was part of that connection. One of the musicians leaned over and whispered, "You have a gift. Don't hide it." Those words struck her deeply. She had always been hesitant, unsure if her music mattered or if anyone would care. But now, seeing the reaction of those around her, hearing their encouragement, she realized that her gift was not just for herself. It could touch others, bring joy, comfort, and maybe even inspire them in ways she hadn't imagined. After she finished, she stepped back, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. People came up to her, complimenting her, asking questions about how she learned to play, expressing admiration for the emotion she had conveyed. She smiled, feeling shy but proud. It was the first time she had allowed herself to be vulnerable in such a public way, and it was liberating. The room had changed with her music, just as she had changed. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive. The rest of the day was a blur of excitement. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment, replaying the notes in her mind, imagining how she could continue to grow and share her music. Every interaction felt colored by the experience, every laugh and conversation carrying a new warmth. She felt as if the world itself had become more vibrant, more full of possibility. The ordinary routines of life now held new potential, each small act of kindness or laughter intertwined with the memory of the music she had shared. That evening, back in her apartment, she sat by the piano once more. The city outside hummed softly, and she could hear the distant sounds of people winding down, voices drifting through the streets. She played again, this time more confidently, letting her imagination guide the melodies. She experimented with rhythm, tempo, and harmony, discovering new ways to express herself. It felt like learning to breathe all over again, a rediscovery of a part of herself she had kept hidden for too long. As the night grew deeper, she paused and reflected on the day. She realized that the spark she had felt wasn't just about music. It was about courage, about allowing herself to step into the unknown. The musicians' encouragement, the quiet attention of the cafe patrons, the warmth of shared laughter. All of it had shown her that taking a chance could open doors she hadn't even known existed. She felt gratitude, not just for the opportunity to play, but for the gentle push that had nudged her toward it. She made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to play, to explore her music, and to share it whenever she could. She didn't know where it would lead, but she understood now that even small steps could lead to profound changes. The ordinary world she had lived in for so long was still there, but it now seemed like a stage waiting for her melodies, a canvas ready to be painted with the sounds she could create. The laughter that had filled the room had not disappeared. It had transformed, mingling with the music, becoming something new and beautiful. As she finally rested, she felt a sense of peace and anticipation intertwined. She was ready for the next step, ready to see where this journey would take her, and ready to embrace the life that awaited beyond the familiar routines. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and she understood that it all began with a single moment, a first note, and the courage to play it. The next afternoon, the cafe buzzed with its usual activity. The smell of fresh bread and coffee lingered in the air, and the clinking of cups and saucers mixed with laughter. She arrived early, her heart beating with anticipation. Today was different. She wasn't just a quiet observer anymore. She had a spark inside her, a sense that she could create something that mattered. The piano at home waited for her, but she carried the excitement of sharing her music with her everywhere now. As she moved through her morning tasks, she felt a flutter of nerves. What if she made mistakes? What if her music wasn't as powerful as she hoped? She pushed the thoughts aside, reminding herself of the encouragement she had received. The musicians from the previous day were back again, setting up their instruments and greeting the staff with laughter and friendly chatter. They waved at her, and she waved back, smiling through the nerves that lingered in her chest. When the cafe began to quiet down, she found a moment alone with the keyboard the musicians had brought. She took a deep breath, letting her hands hover over the keys. The first note sounded soft and tentative. Her fingers stumbled slightly, but she didn't stop. She played another, and then another, letting her confidence build with each note. The room seemed to hold its breath, the usual chatter fading as people noticed the music filling the air. The music changed everything. People paused mid-conversation, their eyes lifting toward the source of the sound. The laughter that had filled the room before was replaced with a calm, attentive silence. Even the children who had been running around stopped, drawn in by the melody. She felt a thrill as she realized that her music had the power to shift the atmosphere, to capture the attention and hearts of those around her. She allowed herself to feel every note, every rhythm. She played melodies she had practiced alone for years, adding new twists and turns as inspiration struck. Each note seemed to echo off the walls, intertwining with the laughter and murmurs that had been there before. She noticed the smiles on the faces of strangers, the way their eyes softened, the way they leaned slightly forward as if to catch every sound. She realized in that moment that music was more than sound. It was a connection, a bridge between hearts. A young man sitting at a nearby table watched her with rapt attention. His usual easygoing smile had turned into quiet admiration. The baristas paused in their work, their hands frozen mid-motion, as if not to disturb the delicate spell of her playing. The musicians nodded at her occasionally, offering subtle encouragement, but mostly they let her take the lead. She felt as though the cafe itself had become an audience, the walls listening and responding to every note she played. As the minutes passed, she lost track of time. The music flowed from her naturally, a reflection of her emotions and imagination. She played faster, then slower, exploring dynamics and harmonies, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the cafe. The usual hum of daily life was replaced with something extraordinary. People leaned closer, whispering to one another about the unexpected beauty of her playing. Some eyes glistened with tears, others sparkled with joy, and she realized the depth of the impact she could have through her music. The turning point came when she moved into a piece that had always felt personal to her. It was a melody she had created in moments of solitude, one that captured her hopes, fears, and dreams. As the notes filled the room, a hush fell over everyone. Conversations stopped, coffee cups paused in midair, and the clinking of spoons was replaced by the gentle cadence of her fingers on the keys. She looked up briefly and saw that even the regular patrons, who had been chatting and joking moments before, were completely absorbed. Her heart swelled as she felt the connection between herself and those around her. The music seemed to carry emotions she hadn't been able to express in words. She realized that this was why she had kept it inside for so long. The power of her own voice, even in music, had scared her. But now, seeing the effect it had, she felt a surge of joy and relief. Her music was not just a private escape anymore. It was a gift she could share, a way to touch lives in a quiet but profound way. As the final notes lingered in the air, a wave of applause swept through the cafe. It started softly, then grew louder, more heartfelt, as people stood to acknowledge the talent that had filled the room. She blushed, surprised and overwhelmed, her hands still hovering over the keys. The musicians clapped along, their smiles wide with pride and encouragement. Even the children cheered, their voices small but excited, adding to the warmth that now filled the space. One of the older patrons, who rarely spoke more than a few words, approached her with a gentle smile. "I haven't heard anything like that in years," he said quietly. "Thank you for sharing your gift." The words struck her deeply. She realized that her music had a purpose beyond her own enjoyment. It could bring comfort, inspire joy, and create moments that people would remember. She had feared judgment and failure, but she had found something much greater: the ability to connect, to influence, and to bring a small piece of beauty into someone else's day. After the applause subsided, the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Conversations resumed, laughter returned, and the clinking of cups filled the air once more. But something had shifted. There was a new energy in the room, a sense that the ordinary had become extraordinary, even if just for a moment. People smiled more brightly, lingered longer, and seemed to carry a piece of the music with them. She stepped back from the keyboard, her hands trembling slightly from excitement and emotion. The musicians gathered around her, offering words of praise and gentle suggestions for future practice. She felt a sense of belonging and support she had never expected. For the first time, she understood that her passion could be shared openly, and that the world might embrace it rather than reject it. Returning to her apartment that evening, she felt both exhilarated and reflective. She replayed the day in her mind, remembering the expressions, the applause, and the quiet moments of connection. She sat at her piano and played again, experimenting with new ideas inspired by the cafe experience. Each note felt more confident, more expressive, as if the act of sharing her music had unlocked something previously dormant. She thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when she might falter. But she also knew that she had discovered a path that could bring meaning not only to her life but to the lives of others. The laughter that had once filled the cafe had been joined by music, creating a harmony that felt larger than herself. She felt gratitude for the courage to play, the people who had listened, and the unexpected moment that had changed everything. As she closed the piano lid and sat quietly, the city outside twinkled with lights and distant sounds. She felt a sense of peace and possibility intertwined, knowing that this was only the beginning. Her music had changed the room once, and it would continue to change other rooms, other moments, other lives. The first real connection she had shared through her gift had opened a door to something extraordinary, and she was ready to step fully through it in the days following her first performance. The world around her began to feel different. The cafe seemed brighter, as if the walls remembered the music she had played and carried it with them. People greeted her with warmer smiles, some stopping to ask if she would play again. She felt a new sense of confidence, but also a hint of nervousness. Sharing her music had been exhilarating, but she now realized that people expected more, and she wasn't sure if she could always meet those expectations. Her thoughts constantly returned to the piano in her apartment. She spent hours practicing, exploring melodies she had never dared to play before. She experimented with different harmonies, tempos, and moods, discovering that music was a language she could use to express feelings that words could not. Every time she played, she felt more connected to herself and to the world around her. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner life and the lives of others. One afternoon, as she walked through the market, a friend from the cafe spotted her and waved eagerly. "We were talking about you earlier," the friend said, smiling. "Some of the customers were saying your music made their mornings so much better. They're hoping you'll play more often." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and apprehension. It was one thing to play when she felt inspired, and another to feel an unspoken pressure to perform. But the thought of bringing joy to others, just as her music had brought to her, pushed her forward. She started receiving small invitations to play at other local events. A nearby library asked if she could play for a small gathering of children, and a community center wanted her to perform at a casual evening gathering. Each invitation was both exciting and intimidating. She spent nights planning what to play, rehearsing over and over, and imagining the reactions of her audience. With each new opportunity, she realized that sharing her music could create moments of connection she had never experienced before. Her family noticed the change in her as well. They commented on her lighter step, her brighter eyes, and the quiet happiness that seemed to linger around her. She felt proud of herself, but also a little vulnerable. Music had always been private, a secret world where she could be herself without judgment. Now, as her life began to open up, she was sharing a piece of herself with everyone, and that felt both thrilling and delicate. At the library, she sat before a small group of children, their curious eyes fixed on her. She played a simple melody, letting the notes float through the room. The children listened intently, some swaying to the rhythm, others humming along softly. After a few minutes, a shy little girl approached and asked if she could try pressing a key. She smiled and nodded, guiding the girl's fingers and encouraging her to play. Watching the joy on the child's face reminded her of the power of music to connect people, to bring smiles and spark new experiences. The community center event was a different kind of challenge. Adults and older members of the neighborhood had gathered, and she felt the weight of expectations more acutely. She started cautiously, playing familiar tunes, and gradually moved into her own compositions. By the time she finished, there was a round of applause that seemed to fill every corner of the room. People approached her afterward, thanking her, sharing stories of how her music had touched them, and encouraging her to continue. The experience was humbling and uplifting, showing her that her gift could reach across ages and backgrounds. Despite the growing recognition, she faced moments of self-doubt. There were nights when she questioned whether she was truly talented or if her music really mattered. She worried about making mistakes, about not living up to the expectations of those who had heard her before. But each time she played, those fears melted away. The connection she felt with her audience, the joy she saw in their eyes, and the simple act of expressing herself through music reminded her that the courage to share was more important than perfection. Word of her talent began to spread more widely. A local newspaper ran a small piece about her performances at the cafe, highlighting the way her music had brought warmth and happiness to the community. Social media posts from attendees shared snippets of her playing, and messages of encouragement poured in. Some were from people she had never met, strangers who had been touched by a short video or a story about her music. It was overwhelming at times, but also deeply rewarding. She realized that her quiet life had grown into something much bigger, a ripple effect that reached far beyond what she could have imagined. Through it all, she remained grounded by her love for music itself. She continued to practice alone, experimenting with new melodies and arrangements. She discovered that the more she allowed herself to play freely, the more authentic and moving her performances became. Her music was no longer just a personal refuge. It had become a way to connect, to inspire, and to share a part of herself that words could never convey. One evening, after a particularly moving performance at a local gathering, she walked home feeling light and fulfilled. The streets were quiet, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. She thought about the journey she had begun with a simple note, a first tune, and the laughter that had filled the room that day. It seemed incredible that a single moment could lead to such a chain of experiences, opportunities, and connections. The ordinary world she had known had expanded into something richer and more meaningful, shaped by her courage and her music. She reflected on the people she had touched so far, the children, the neighbors, the cafe patrons, and even strangers who had heard her through a video. Each person had received a piece of her heart through her melodies, and each reaction, whether a smile, a tear, or a quiet nod, reinforced the importance of sharing her gift. She understood now that music was not just for entertainment. It was a language of the soul, a way to reach out and connect with the human experience in ways that words often failed. Her confidence grew steadily. She began to see herself not just as someone who enjoyed playing in private, but as a musician who could influence and inspire. Invitations continued to arrive, each one presenting new challenges and opportunities to grow. She embraced them with gratitude and curiosity, knowing that her journey was far from over. The spark that had ignited in her apartment, and then in the cafe, now burned steadily, guiding her toward new experiences and moments of connection. Every night, she returned to her piano, her sanctuary, to explore new melodies and refine her compositions. Each note played was a reminder of how far she had come, and how much more there was to discover. She found joy in the simple act of creating, in the quiet moments of self-expression, and in the knowledge that her music could touch lives in ways she had never imagined. Through this journey, she realized that sharing her gift was not just about performing. It was about courage, about vulnerability, and about trust. Trusting herself, trusting her music, and trusting that others would receive it with open hearts. Each performance, each small audience, reinforced this truth, teaching her that the act of giving freely, without expectation, could create ripples of joy, inspiration, and connection far beyond what she could see. She understood that the ripple effect of her first tunes was only beginning. Each note played, each smile received, and each story shared became part of a larger journey. The ordinary moments of life, the morning routines, the laughter in the cafe, the quiet walks home, had become infused with possibility. Music had given her a new lens through which to see the world, and she embraced it fully, ready for the moments yet to come. Months had passed since the first time she had played in the cafe, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She had grown more confident, not only in her music but in herself. The nervous, quiet observer she had once been had blossomed into someone willing to step forward, to take risks, and to share her gift openly. Each day was still ordinary in some ways, but it now carried an undercurrent of possibility and hope that had been missing before. The cafe had become her familiar stage, a place where she could experiment with new pieces and connect with people who had grown to expect her music with warmth and anticipation. Each performance was different, and she reveled in the unique energy that each audience brought. Sometimes it was laughter and conversation, other times quiet attention, and occasionally tears or wide-eyed awe. She had learned to listen to the room, to feel the mood, and to let her music respond naturally, creating moments that were never scripted but always meaningful. Her growing reputation led to invitations beyond the cafe. Local events, small concerts, and community gatherings began to reach out to her. Each opportunity was exciting but also a challenge. She had to balance her work, her personal life, and her music, but she welcomed the growth and the new experiences. She discovered that performing was not just about playing notes. It was about connecting, understanding people, and conveying emotion that went beyond words. One evening, she was invited to play at a charity event. The hall was filled with people she didn't know, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves but reminded herself that the music was her voice, her way to communicate. As she began, the audience listened intently, and soon, the room was filled with a quiet energy that was almost tangible. She played melodies that were both familiar and new, weaving emotions into each phrase, and she could see the effect on the people around her. Faces softened, smiles appeared, and some eyes glistened with tears. She realized that her music had the power to touch lives, to create moments of shared humanity, and she felt gratitude for every note she played. Her journey was not without its challenges. There were nights when self-doubt crept in, when she questioned whether she could live up to the expectations she had created for herself. She worried about mistakes, about forgetting a note, or about losing the connection with her audience. But she had learned to embrace the imperfections, to allow herself to be human, and to trust that the sincerity of her music mattered more than technical perfection. Each performance, each small interaction, reinforced the lesson that courage, vulnerability, and authenticity were the true heart of her gift. Her personal life also changed. Friends and neighbors began to recognize her talent and encouraged her to take it further. They spoke of her music in glowing terms, sharing stories of how it had brightened their days, brought comfort, or inspired hope. These words were deeply humbling, and she cherished each one. They reminded her that even small acts, like a simple melody played in a cafe, could ripple outward in ways she might never fully understand. She also found joy in teaching others. A few children and young adults approached her, curious about the piano, eager to learn. She welcomed them, guiding their fingers, showing them how to feel the music rather than just play the notes. Teaching became another form of connection, a way to pass on the joy she had discovered. She found that helping others express themselves musically brought her as much satisfaction as performing for an audience. The shared experience of learning and creating music forged bonds that went beyond words. Back in her apartment, the piano remained her sanctuary. Each day, she would sit and explore new melodies, revisiting old compositions and refining her technique. She discovered that music was endless, always evolving, and she found delight in the process of creation. Sometimes she would play simply for herself, allowing the music to flow freely, unbound by the expectations of an audience. Other times, she would rehearse for upcoming performances, shaping her pieces to convey emotion and story. In every moment, the piano was both her refuge and her bridge to the world. The laughter that had first filled the cafe months ago still echoed in her memories. She often thought of that day, how a simple moment of curiosity and encouragement had led to everything she was experiencing now. That first spark, that tiny step of courage, had changed her life. It reminded her that extraordinary moments often start in the most ordinary ways, and that the choice to embrace them could lead to profound transformation. As her reputation grew, she was invited to perform in slightly larger venues, each one bringing new audiences and new experiences. She remained humble, aware of the responsibility that came with sharing her gift. She learned to read a room, to sense the emotions in the air, and to let her music respond organically. She discovered that her role was not just to perform but to create an atmosphere, to bring people together, and to leave them with a feeling that lingered long after the final note had faded. Her life had become a rhythm of creation and connection, of ordinary days infused with extraordinary moments. Even in mundane routines, she carried the sense of possibility and joy that music had given her. Walking through the streets, greeting friends, and interacting with her community all carried a new depth, colored by the understanding that sharing her authentic self could make a difference. One quiet evening, after a long day of performances and teaching, she sat at her piano alone. The room was still, the city outside humming softly, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She reflected on the journey she had taken, from the first tentative notes played in her apartment to the moments of shared connection in cafes, libraries, and community halls. Each step had been small, but together they had created a life that felt vibrant, meaningful, and fully her own. She thought of the people she had touched along the way, the laughter-filled patrons of the cafe, the children learning their first melodies, the strangers who had been moved by her music. Each connection, no matter how small, had contributed to a larger story, a tapestry woven from courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to share her gift. The music she played was no longer just for herself. It had become a living presence in the lives of others. As she played that evening, she allowed herself to dream without limits. She imagined new melodies, new audiences, and new experiences that awaited her. She felt excitement and anticipation, but also a deep peace, knowing that the journey itself was as valuable as the destination. Each note she played was a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she could go. The first tunes that had changed everything were still alive in her heart, guiding her, inspiring her, and reminding her of the power of courage and connection. She understood now that life could be ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, that small moments of bravery could ripple outward to touch countless lives. Music had given her a voice, a way to connect, and a path to fulfillment she had never dared to imagine. As the night deepened, she closed her eyes and let the final notes fade. The room was silent, yet filled with a lingering warmth, a testament to the journey she had undertaken. She smiled, knowing that she had embraced her gift fully, shared it openly, and allowed it to shape a life filled with meaning, connection, and joy. The laughter, the first notes, and the courage to play had indeed changed everything, and she was ready for every moment that lay ahead.